So I have a little story for you. There was a Sunday school teacher on an Easter Sunday, much like today. And the teacher asked the little class, does anyone know the meaning of Easter? And Johnny was like, oh, call on me. But she knew he was a little mischievous, so she decided to not call on Johnny. She called on Jimmy instead. And she said, okay, Jimmy, what is the meaning of Easter? And Jimmy said, the meaning of Easter is the Easter Bunny comes and he leaves eggs and presents for you. And the teacher's like, okay, Jimmy, yeah, that's one meaning of Easter, but can someone else give me another one? And Johnny again wanted to answer, but she didn't call on Johnny, she called on Susie instead. And Susie said, Easter is when you get a whole brand new outfit to wear to church. And the teacher's like, okay, well, yes, and that's a cute dress, Susie, but does anybody know a deeper meaning of Easter? And finally she had to call on Johnny because Johnny was the only one with his hand raised, and so Johnny said, the meaning of Easter is that when Jesus died, they put him in his tomb, and then 3 days later they go roll the stone away, and the teacher's thinking, oh, thank goodness, some of my Christian teaching has paid off, it's not for naught. And then Johnny went on to say, and if Jesus comes out and sees his shadow, so we all want to know the meaning of Easter, right? That's what we really want to know. And if you're fairly new to this teaching, you might wonder, what do we see as the meaning of Easter? And how do we celebrate these holidays of religious teachings that may be special to us, but may not be special to others? And Easter's one of those. And if you may notice that in our foyer, we have a quilt that has all the symbols of religions on it, because we do honor all paths to spirituality, including Christianity. And we know that this day might be very special to some of you and not to others. So happy Easter to all of you. But I do want to give you some historical context for Easter, because I believe that the more informed we are, the more compassionate we can be. And so most scholars agree that the origin of the word Easter is the ostra, an ancient word that means spring. But a lot of European languages actually use one form or another of the Latin name for Easter, which is Pascha, which is derived from the Hebrew word meaning Passover. So that's another origin of that. And scholars often believe that the Christian writers adapted the mythical story of Ishtar, the goddess of spring, who's also sometimes called Astara. And the most revered aspects of this particular goddess was the spirit of renewal. And this goddess was the bringer of light after a long, dark winter. And the goddess was often depicted with a rabbit, which is an animal that kind of represents the arrival of spring and the fertility of the season. So embedded in the celebration of Ishtar was the idea of resurrection. And Astara was the divinity of the radiant dawn and the upspringing light, which brings joy and blessing. So this wisdom could have easily been adapted by the Christian writers into the story of the resurrection that is celebrated on this day. So in years past, I've actually explored on Easter Sunday some of the more metaphysical explanations of the Easter story, the story of the resurrection of Jesus. And I may do that again in the future at some point. But today, this morning, I want to keep everything light. And so I want to talk more about spring itself and the general symbology of Easter and this time of year and promise of spring. So I've peppered my talk with several quotes about spring to kind of keep us focused on this idea that spring is really universally celebrated. And Charles Dickens described spring this way. He said it was one of those March days when the sun shines hot and the wind blows cold, when it is summer in the light and winter in the shade. So spring is that kind of middle in between. So how many of you are from a different state than Florida? Raise your hand if you're from somewhere else. Okay, almost everybody. So since we live in Florida, spring is not really the season, the important season that it is in other places in the country and around the world. And since a lot of people watch our talk from other places, I thought it might be interesting to explore this concept of spring from a spiritual perspective, because spring not only happens out there in nature, this season also happens in the cyclical nature of our lives. So let's see if we can find some wisdom in the promise of spring. So as we learned in elementary school, spring follows winter, right? So for those of you who've lived in Florida a long time, you might forget that the reality of winter is that it is dark and it is cold, and winter is bleak. And you know, once the snow gets plowed and the plows come through, winter gets pretty unsightly and actually kind of downright ugly in some places. But everything's wet and muddy and mucky, and the leaves that fell in the fall have now been soaked for months, and they've turned into this mud and this muck. But in the mess and in the mud, the earth is being readied for birth. And all of this decaying plant material just nourishes the soil and the roots that are down there. It's the necessary food, actually, for the life to burst forth. And the word for all of that moist muckiness is called humus. It's the same etymology of the word humility. So out of humus comes new life and new expression, and I think that out of our own humility, newness can emerge as well. And I find it interesting that when we compare what happens in nature to what happens in our own personal experiences, we realize that we have a spring time in our lives too. So perhaps we can all relate to the symbology of winter kind of turning the corner into spring. And you know, in this year of the pandemic, it feels like we have all been through this long, unyielding winter of just mud and muck. You know, all of our leaves fell off months ago. And we've seemed to just sit for a long time now, just kind of dormant in the world. It's been a time of introspection and thinking. It's been a rich period of reevaluating what we want to do when all of this is over. We've looked very carefully at our daily lives, and we've revalued everything that has stopped existing. And so we've kind of scraped anything aside that was unnecessary. And many of us feel like we're just like standing in a field like a naked tree. No leaves, no nothing, nothing extravagant, very little beauty to be found. We are tired. We are so very, very tired. And we are ready for spring to come in our lives, right? So over these past couple of weeks, here in our community collectively, and I bet individually for you too, we've begun to get a whiff of spring in the air. Vaccinations actually are promising this new beginning and opportunities, and we're starting to believe that this long winter is going to release its grip on us. And so perhaps nature can give us a few lessons on what this might be like. And perhaps we can find some, some wisdom in the blossoms and the symbols that spring has that we're all familiar with. So as you know, spring begins very tentatively. It begins slowly, but growth starts happening nonetheless. The ground may look awful, it may look worn out, and like it may never produce another living thing again. But if you look closely, tender little shoots of green life will begin to peek through with a little bit of tenacity, right? So I just came from Georgia. Before I lived here 3 years ago, I moved down here 3.5, almost 4 now. But I lived there for many, many years in Georgia. And the very first thing, the very first green we would see in Georgia were crocuses and daffodils. And from those small beginnings, we knew the days were going to get longer and we were going to get warmer, right? So William Wordsworth talks about daffodils. He says, "I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats high o'er the vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze." So when we saw those daffodils of spring, we knew something was changing. And then one day, we would walk outside and bam, everything was green. Everything was green. And I think that that's what happens metaphysically in our lives too. All of us, as I said, we've gone through this autumn where structures fall apart. The autumn cycle is when you have endings, when jobs end, relationships end, situations and traditions and routines, they fall apart. That's the autumn season. And it's on these autumn days that you just kind of notice one little leaf falling and then another, and there's nothing you can do to stop them, right? They just keep falling apart. And we collectively went through this autumn season last March, April, and May, when things just happened. They started falling. This trip was canceled, and this tradition was broken. This graduation ceremony didn't happen. All those little things started falling apart. And we watched the leaves of our structures just go just go. And we were powerless. We wanted to glue it all back together, but it wasn't happening. And then we slipped into winter, as I said. We just kind of hunkered down, didn't we? This darkness, this period of isolation and distancing, and we've been creating humus all around us. The soil of our consciousness is really rich right now. Most of us have been taking classes together. We've journaled a lot over these last few months. We've been Zooming and watching TED Talks and reading and doing all these things. So our consciousness has been getting rich, right? And some of us have been working out. We've changed our eating. We've done a lot of different things to kind of prepare ourselves in this winter time. And all of us have been resting more, right? But winter is segueing into spring. We're tired of coping with the mud and muck, but hope is here. We just spent the entire month of March focused on a new vision for ourselves, right? So it's a time of hope. Sarah Van Brofnak is the author that writes a lot about gratitude, and she says, expect to have hope rekindled. Expect it. Expect your prayers will be answered in wondrous ways. The dry seasons in life do not last. The spring rains will come again. And spring is the time for all of us to look very carefully for those little green stems of possibility. So that's a good symbol to look at. Green stems of possibility. What green stems can you see? You know, you've been planting seeds for months. Do you know what you planted? Do you know what you planted? Can you think back over your months of daydreaming and visioning and imagining what would life look like when all this is done? Now is the time to listen to your intuition for what should happen next for you. What ideas and hunches do you have for bigger experiences? Now's the time to start saying yes to invitations and new things. This is the time to pay attention to the acts of kindness, these ideas that rise in you, that make the world seem to open up with possibility again. And these are all the little green stems of possibility that are here right now. And another lesson is found in the symbol of new life in spring. You know, even in ancient traditions, eggs were always used to symbolize, to illustrate the promise of new life. And the beginning of spring is a beautiful time in the world because everything is being reborn. A new generation of life is begun with the emergence of babies, right? On the farms, those eggs, they're hatching into little chicks and ducklings and goslings, and all of those things are coming out of eggs. But there are also animals being born, right? Little calves and lambs and colts and piglets and baby kid goats, they're all being born right now. And in the forest there are baby birds and baby squirrels and chipmunks and skunks and bunnies and all those things. And the bears come out of hibernation, and what do they bring? They bring their new cubs out. If you were on the members Facebook page yesterday, I shared a video actually that my mom shared where this mama bear had 4 cubs and she was trying to get them across the road. I don't know about you, but my heart was like racing watching these bears try to get across the road. The police had stopped the cars and she would get one across, then she'd have to go back and get another one, and that one would come back. It was just a mess. If you haven't seen it, get on Facebook because it's cute. And a friend of mine texted me the other day, and she walked into her backyard to find a little baby fawn, a little baby deer up against the fence in her yard. The mama deer had left the baby for whatever mama deers do in the spring, and she left her baby there for safekeeping. And then my friend got to take a few pictures of her before the mama came and got the baby again. Just a sure sign of spring, right? And if you've been on my Facebook page, you've seen a couple of pictures of this sandhill crane couple in our neighborhood had two baby birds, and they grow fast. Man, they really grow fast. We actually saw them when we drove out this morning. At least there was one of them. I'm not going to talk about that other baby. I don't know what happened to it. But anyway, rebirth is what spring celebrates and promises. So what is it time to birth in your experience? What has been lying like fallow in the soil of your heart, in the womb of your existence, in the nest that you've created that is ready to be born and come forth into your life? What eggs are you sitting on that you fertilized over this months of waiting, right? Has a cub of an idea been born in your hibernation that you might be ready to show to the world? Maybe? Have you been creating something in your time apart that it might be time to share with a few precious people? You know, mothers of baby animals are really protective of their young. and the spring as they grow. So nature's wisdom cautions us to hold close to ourselves our new ideas, our new adventures, and just share them with a few people that will help you nurture them. But maybe it is time for some of your newness to come out and let other people have a peek. And just as every newborn does, man, growth happens fast in the spring. So watch your ideas grow. And just as every animal grows, another thing that happens is flowers. Flowers are another symbol of the spring. Lady Bird Johnson said this, "Where flowers bloom, so does hope." I don't know if you know this, but Lady Bird Johnson was the first lady who made sure that all of our highways in our country have wildflowers growing beside them to make the spring beautiful in our country. So there's just an abundance of flowers. And speaking of abundance, abundance is the God quality that's on display in the springtime and this time of your year and this time in your life. There's a fullness to spring, almost a flamboyance that's happening right in the flowers. Everything's so colorful because in addition to all these abundance of green grass and leaves, the plants are bursting forth with flowers and color is everywhere. I don't know about you, but that's what I love about spring. The hot pink of azaleas and the bougainvilleas and the bright yellows and oranges of the hibiscus are out. There's red of the tulip and the soft pink of the flowering cherry trees. I don't know, do we get flowering cherry trees here?
No.
Okay, go to Georgia and look at them. And I remember as a child in Colorado, the purple iris would come up in the spring. That was always pretty. So many colors. And if you're growing those flowers, there are usually so many of them and they're going to die. So what do? You give them away. Abundance is what the flowers of spring celebrate and promise. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the earth laughs in flowers. The earth laughs in flowers. And I love the idea that Spirit is laughing with the abundance of colors and variety through its expression in the spring and in the spring of our experiences. Parker Palmer, if you know him, he's a modern day Christian teacher. He writes about the abundance of spring and the flamboyance I've mentioned too. He says this, "Perhaps we are meant to yield to this flamboyance, to understand that life is not always to be measured and meted as winter compels us to do, but to be spent from time to time in a riot of color and growth." So how is abundance showing up in your life as you walk out into this spring? In what ways do you feel richly blessed? The invitation is to share your blessings with others. You know, on Easter we traditionally give baskets away to those that we love. So take someone a basket of fruit or vegetables or candy or flowers or pretty eggs or whatever you have to put in the basket, because these baskets are symbols of sharing your gifts. Sharing your gifts because you have an abundance. And when we have abundance and we share it, that just assures that the universe will continue to bless us. Bees are another symbol of spring that contain a spiritual lesson for us, don't they? So bees visit flower after flower. They just kind of flirt with them and get their pollen, and then they go to another one. And they're hard at work, but they seem to be having a really good time doing it, right? So bees work together to make the world a more beautiful and sweeter place. I want us to be like bees. I want us to be like bees in this community, working together to make everything beautiful and sweet for each other and for anyone who gathers near. And I want us to have fun while we're doing it. And let's not forget butterflies, okay? So butterflies, we talk about butterflies so often in our teaching because they symbolize transformation. And we all have the promise of transformation as we evolve and grow. And you know, some of us are in the caterpillar stage. We're just kind of in one area of our life or another, we're just steadily learning and digesting what we need in order to transform. Or we may be in the chrysalis period where we're lying in wait for that DNA goo to disintegrate everything that we were, and then becoming acceptant of our new identity. But we might be a new butterfly drying our wings out too, or we may be flitting around the world making it a beautiful place. But every single one of us are in one stage or another of the butterfly's life in different parts of our own experiences. So when you see a butterfly, ask yourself, where am I transforming in my life? Where do I feel fully developed? And where do I still feel like I'm just kind of forming myself in a learning phase, because butterflies are a promise of spring, that everything in form changes. Everything becomes more beautiful with the passage of time. Harriet Ann Jacobs writes, "The beautiful spring came, and when nature resumes her loveliness, the human soul is apt to revive also." So our human souls are reviving right now. They just are. I feel a great awakening happening here as this hope of this new phase unfolds and delights us all with possibility. Parker Palmer also writes about the cycles of the season, and he says this: "Nature teaches a steady lesson. If we want to save our lives, we cannot cling to them, but must spend them with abandon. When we are obsessed with bottom lines and productivity, with efficiency of time and motion, with the rational relation of means and ends, with projecting reasonable goals and making a beeline toward them, it seems unlikely that our work will ever bear full fruit, unlikely that we will ever know the fullness of spring in our lives." In other words, nature teaches us this: sometimes you have to live your life fully, without apology, in the brightest, most colorful way you can, not worrying about being safe, not worrying about being careful with your energy and your time, but joyfully living out loud. Spring has arrived, and it's time to live this way. Robin Williams wrote this: "Spring is nature's way of saying, let's party." Right? So Easter is a beautiful day. Easter is a beautiful day, here to remind you that renewal is at hand. So I hope you get an Easter basket today. I do. And I hope it's filled with all of these symbols of the promise of spring. Look around you. If you don't get an Easter basket, look around you at the world for these symbols. I promise you, in the decorations of this day to celebrate, you will find them. Peeps and bunnies and eggs and bees and butterflies and green grass of abundance. They're all out there. You might see crosses too. You know, if you were here last year, remember, crosses are your symbol to come to your center and look up. Come to your center and look up, and give yourself that divine wisdom that's always available in any situation. And if you find chocolate in your Easter basket, that's a symbol too. It's a reminder that if you haven't given your minister any chocolate lately, your opportunity to do so has been renewed. Happy Easter. I love you all. I can't wait to hear about your rebirth this spring. It's promised today and every day, and so it is.